We've all seen a Reaper player do this, and maybe we've even seen a Reinhardt player do this. It's obvious to us that they're going to ult. It's something we've undoubtedly learned from previous encounters, or maybe even our own past mistakes. You might look back and laugh at these plays because they seem like such rookie mistakes, but let's take a second and think about this. There was a time where you could have made this exact same play and it would have worked. Your team may have even praised you for it. But the higher you climbed, the less praise you received, and the more "Reaper, what are you doing?" you got in its place. Which means there had to have been some point during our climb where our perspectives shifted, along with our opinions, to make us consider this a bad play. I want to dive a bit deeper into this phenomenon. If we analyze these plays, in both cases, the players appear to tunnel vision, completely ignoring their surroundings, with one goal in mind. They want to use their ult no matter what, and their behavior subconsciously tells us that. If you've ever done this, in the moment, you probably weren't thinking about how obvious it looked. And now that you know better, you might dismiss this type of play as something only bad players do. But these are actually only basic examples of a habit that you probably still have. In fact, everyone is guilty of it to an extent, whether they realize it or not. Assuming what I just said is true, then it must be possible to predict a play even when there aren't such obvious signs. Let's go back to an example I used in one of my previous videos. I described how when an Ana player gets backlined or dove, she's prone to certain actions, and those actions revolve around the use of her sleep dart. Most high-level players instinctively know when your average Ana player will use her sleep dart in this situation, and it's usually moments after she first sets eyes on you. Some of you listening to this are going, well yeah, duh, while I'm sure there are others hearing this that have never noticed, and actively do this while playing her. But regardless of whether you knew or not, now that you do know, what happens if you're playing Ana and your opponent is aware of this habit? If they know it's coming, they're going to counter it, the same way that you counter a Reaper or a Rein when they tunnel vision and ult. Meaning it's the same type of behavior I showcased at the start of this video, only more subtle, which tells us that this behavior probably only gets more subtle as you get better at the game, without ever fully disappearing. The difference between this habit and the earlier ones I mentioned is that Ana players still make this mistake in the mid to high ranks, and I've even seen it happen in Masters. But in general, as you climb higher, there are more and more Ana players that become self-aware of this behavior and readjust. Instead of the Ana tunneling and using sleep dart immediately, the player instead pauses for a second to assess the situation, and then once the opportune moment arrives, they use their sleep dart or other forms of defense. Going back to Reaper and Reinhardt, a funny thing that you can do using this same logic is walk towards your opponent, mimicking what a low-level player would do if they were going to ult, and watch as the entire enemy team backs up in fear. Just make sure you don't forget to pull up your shield. I wanted to get better footage of this, but it's not exactly foolproof. You can basically force the entire enemy team back without actually having to do anything, even if you don't have your ult. The bronze play that you thought was obvious before is now being used against you. Who knew that pretending to play like you're in bronze could actually be the most grandmaster play you could make? There's thousands of examples out there similar to the Ana one I mentioned, and for the sake of reinforcing my point, here's another one that's even more subtle. I'm going to let this one play out before I say anything. Alright, now, check out this Pharah. She gets pinged by the Mercy on my team, making everyone aware that she was on the second floor of that building. Knowing that Pharah was in that room before the fight started was enough to alert Mercy and I that Pharah was going to come back later for a flank. She played it off well by joining back into the main fight for a few seconds, and then waiting for everyone to get invested into that fight before heading back. But both Mercy and I knew what was about to happen, without even having to verbally communicate it. You can see me doing a double and triple take at the window, even after Pharah appeared to join back into the main fight. And you can see that Mercy repositions as well in preparation. I'll be honest and say that I thought Pharah was going to attempt a flank ult, which is why I slept her before shooting, and Mercy probably thought the same too, since she pulled her pistol out instead of healing. Maybe Pharah changed her mind once she noticed that I was alone, or maybe I was wrong. But the main point is that I knew she was going to flank nearly 20 seconds before she actually did, meaning I wasn't caught off guard and forced to rely solely on my reflexes. I've mentioned in other videos that I don't like to put an emphasis on positioning in order to climb, and the reason for that is that what one might consider bad positioning, another might consider good positioning. It just depends on what you're taking into consideration. Technically, if I was positioned in any of these other spots, I could have supported my team better and also prevented the Pharah ult I thought was coming. But in any of those positions, I would have also had more variables to consider. First off, some of these positions are too open, and if my team backed up, I could end up in a 1v5, and in the positions where it'd be less likely for a 1v5 to happen, I would have had more ults to put into consideration. Are all of those added variables worth it just to be able to heal my team? The two spots that could have potentially been better are up here, but then Pharah would have been more likely to take this path, and Mercy may have not been able to help depending on the angle. I really don't think there's a correct answer, but there could be players out there that are able to come up with a better solution. I personally decided the best course of action was to simply back up and focus on the Pharah, because I knew if I had gone forward, my chances of dying would have gone up, and if I repositioned myself on the high ground, the chances of getting help were lower. I will say though, that we did end up losing this fight, so let me know if you think there was a better course of action. Noticing these subtle behaviors is probably the most significant difference between ranks, and unfortunately, it's something that can't really be taught, since there's an infinite number of situations and variables to consider. But as you understand more of these situations, you'll inevitably climb. The reason I point all of this out is that if you're having trouble climbing, this is probably the biggest reason. There's more to be considered that you might not be seeing. You may be doing things that look obvious to other players, and those other players are probably doing things that you're not noticing. Understanding this is far more important than any stat you can find on the scoreboard. This is what makes it possible to hit GM without high APM, since it's a lot easier to focus on this stuff while playing heroes that don't require a lot of input. It's still possible on high input heroes, and if you're one of those players that can do both, you're probably already on your way to the top 500. Not many players are capable of it. I've gotten some comments saying that my gameplay doesn't look GM level, and it probably doesn't. If you're only watching my immediate actions, it might look like I don't know what I'm doing. But that's the beauty of playing back, or playing a hero that doesn't require as much mechanical skill. You have more time to process what's happening. It might appear in my gameplay that I'm staring off into space at times, but this is what I'm actually doing. Focusing on my own actions is the absolute last thing I worry about while I play. My main focus is preventing my opponent's future actions, or at least limiting them. Not everyone plays this way, and it's not the most captivating thing to watch, since it's not as flashy. But I know what I'm good at, and it's how I climbed. Some people call it game sense, but it's not something that only applies to games. So a more general way to describe it is intuition. Also, the gameplay I record is mostly from quick play, because the lowest estimated queue time for a support in GM is 7 minutes. And I recorded this on a Saturday night. They're usually estimated to be over 10 minutes on any other day. But anyway, in conclusion, we all play like AI, and bronze players are the real grandmasters. Subscribe if you're interested in more analysis videos. GG.